Shabbat Shalom and welcome. This is VBS Torah Study for Shabbos, and I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein here in sunny, warm Southern California, joined by my teacher and dear friend, Rabbi Mark Gelman of South Florida. Mark, good Shabbos. How are you?
Good Shabbos, my dear friend. Man, oh man, oh man. How
Right.
about a week where nothing happens?
How about a quiet week? Even
Yes.
Shabbos comes upon us with two aspirins and a glass of. It's a
Um,
tough time. It's a tough
this is
time.
a very tough time. I'm
And
finding it hard I told you before, I'm finding it hard to watch Holocaust films because one of the themes is why didn't they know? Why didn't they do anything? They didn't believe their country could become filled with anti-Semites. Kaboom.
I had that experience this week. I was visiting another congregation. A fella comes up, very intelligent guy, um, and he says to me, and he has an accent, a slight European accent, and he said, "Listen, the only reason I'm alive is because in 1933 my father saw the writing on the wall in Germany and got us out." He said, "Can't you?
Wow.
Can't?" He looked at me and he said, "Can't you see it? Can't you see it?" And I said, I said, I don't think it's that bad here yet. He said, yeah, we didn't think so either. It's very painful. It's very difficult. And then, of course, this coming week, we will have Yom HaZikaron, remembering of the fallen of Israel. And this year, of course, there's so many more. And we will cry tears that we haven't cried in many, many years. And then Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day. And my friends in Israel, my brother in Israel, telling me that there's a big national debate, actually a discussion that goes on in supermarket checkout lines and on the bank lines and in cafes about how do we celebrate? How much celebrating is acceptable? There's
Right.
still
That's
130
interesting.
hostages in Gaza. There's still soldiers now on the east side of Rafah. There's a dispute with the United States over whether this offensive is uh, is the right thing to do. It's a very, very difficult moment in Israel right now.
Yep.
And we will have celebrations here, of course, because we want to remind our kids of the miracle of Israel, remind them what we fight for. But still, it is so very difficult.
What is, Eddie, fill me in. What is the story at UCLA campus? Is it calm there? Is it clear
Now
there?
it is. Now it is because what happened was so the just to go back a couple of weeks when the campus uprisings began, a group of pro-Palestinian demonstrators began to, uh, protest, and then they built an encampment. They took over the lawn in front of Royce Hall and put up tents. And then because they were, and then the stories in the news now are telling us that they would harass Jewish kids who were walking to and from class and across the campus. Um, and they say they were terrified for their own safety. Other people have other ideas. They started putting up barriers around the encampment. There was a huge counter demonstration a week ago Sunday. I
You
happened to
spoke
be,
at that.
I was one of the speakers. I gave a prayer and a speech. A couple of thousand pro-Israel people came. The police completely lost control of the situation, and the two groups held each other apart, but there were some confrontations in the middle that were very ugly. Um, and then there was in the middle of the night, a group of people, masked people, came and attacked the pro-Palestinian encampment, throwing firecrackers, beating down the barriers. And at that point, the UCLA people called in the LAPD finally, and the police department separated these groups and made some arrests. And the next morning, the police department were instructed to dismantle the encampment. And so the encampment's gone. There's a tremendous amount of damage to the campus, graffiti
Did
and
they
other.
arrest anyone?
They arrested some people, but it happened in the middle of the night. Some people there were about 40 arrests, I think. And I can't tell you who was arrested. So now the campus is quiet. That is, people are going about their business, and
Are they going to have a graduation?
I believe that they will. Let USC cancel their big graduation, but last night had a big family event at the Coliseum. You needed tickets to get in, and people said it was actually very nice. It was a very nice celebration those young people who finish their education at University of Southern California. UCLA, to my knowledge, is having a graduation. I haven't heard that they're not. We'll see what happens. It's
Okay.
tense. It's very tense, and we'll see how long this lasts. We were hopeful this week, and of course, that maybe a hostage for ceasefire deal would come about, but there were the back and forth. So we'll hope for this week. So let's turn to the Torah portion this week, Mark. The Torah
Yeah.
portion this week is a turning point in the Torah. For the last several weeks, we've been reading the depths of Leviticus, the technical rules of sacrifice, of purity in Leviticus, and we've talked about what that might mean for us. But now the Torah turns, and there's a beginning of a new called document, a new section of the book of Leviticus called the Holiness Code. It opens with a very famous fanfare, Kadoshim Tihiyu Hi Kadosh Ani Adonai. You will be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. And then a series of laws. They seem to be rather random, but there is some order and coherence to this, that these are laws of holiness. And what's interesting about all these laws, of course, is that they're practically unenforceable, at least by, terrestrial authorities. These are laws of character. I mean, the most famous one, of course, we'll talk about in a moment, which is the love your neighbor as yourself. But I think the one that I love before that is the law that says you will not put a stumbling block before the blind nor curse the deaf, which is such a very interesting ethical idea. Why not curse a deaf person? He doesn't hear it. You're not hurting him. And so the tradition spends some time asking, because you're not that kind of person, because you don't want to be that kind of person, because ethics isn't just about affecting the world outside of you. It's also about establishing your own sense of character. And that has to do with the way that you treat people, even when they're not aware of how you're treating them. And that pattern of ethical sensitivity, of ethical aspiration to become a holy character is what this Torah portion is about. So let's now turn, and in the middle of that section, of course, comes the watchword, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You will love the other kamocha, either as you love yourself or who is like yourself. That is our version of, as it were, the golden rule. So let's take a moment and focus on that.
Yeah. So some years ago, I wrote the edition of that Dummies series, Tuning Your Car for Dummies, Just for Dummies. I wrote with Tommy, we wrote Religion for Dummies. And one of the research projects we had for the book was to look up the golden rule in all the religions. And we found it. We found it in all religions, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Islam, and obviously Christianity, which has our sacred scriptures, as their sacred scriptures, in addition to the Christian Testament, of course, and also in native religions, the Navajo Sioux and the Navajo Indians, the Sioux Indians, and the Tiwi of North Australia.
Really?
I mean, we're talking about everywhere. There seems to be what was called natural law by Locke and Hume, Bentham. But basically, the idea from the Middle Ages was that there's two ways to know the good, how to do the good. One is through revelation from God. And since God is good, just do what God says and you'll be doing the good. And that's a direct, what Kant called a heteronymous ethic, means it comes from somewhere else, from God. The other is autonomous ethics, which Kant, in his Critique of Practical Reasoning, was all about. And that's learning the good because you develop principles of the good from your own mind, your rational mind.
Internally.
What makes something good?
Yeah.
And so what's interesting about this is that it shows us that other religions teach the same thing we teach, and that religions teach the same thing we teach who never read about us. who don't know about us, who don't know about the Bible, who never had any interaction that way. So what we have to come to, I think, is the conclusion that God revealed the truth about life on planet Earth, human flourishing on planet Earth, not just to us, but to other religions as well. Which means, to use a metaphor that Tommy liked particularly, there's many paths up the mountain. Thinking of the mountain as God, and there's many paths thinking the paths are like the different religions in the world. As against that belief, which is a Jewish belief, by the way, as well, that there's truth in other religions, we say, Tzadikei umot ha'olam yesh lehem chelek ba'olam haba, the righteous of all the nations, other nations, non-Jews, shall have a share in the world to come. There, against that view, there are two pushbacks in the world of religions. One is from Islam and one is from Christianity. In Islam, there's the pushback that Allah is the way, even though Moses was a prophet, Abraham was a prophet, Jesus was a prophet for Muslims. This is the way to God, is through expressing the Shahada, which for them is their Shema. I believe that Allah is God, that Muhammad is his prophet. That's, you say that, you're a Muslim. And the other pushback is Christianity. In John 14:6 and 7, there is the famous verse of Jesus supposedly saying, I am the way, the truth, and the light, and the only way to the Father is through me, which is the foundation for evangelical Christianity, for Christian conversion efforts, and it is the foundation for their belief that the only people who are saved are people who are Christians. Now, against that pushback from Christianity, there is one particular minority view, which I always want to express because I love it so much. And that was the belief of the Swiss theologian Karl Rahner, who developed the idea of anonymous Christians. So here's what he said. Are Jews saved by the death of Jesus? Yes. As Christians, we have to say yes, they are. But the question is, do they have to know that? Do they have to believe that and know it and say it? And the answer to that is no, from Rahner. They don't have to believe, know, or say it, but they have to act in a certain way that shows, just like we say for the righteous of all peoples, they have to behave in a certain way. They have to follow what we call the Noahide commandments. So he says, Gelman and others are saved by Jesus's death and resurrection. And Tommy believed that. Tom Hartman believed that I was saved by Jesus's death and resurrection. And that it was unnecessary for me to have to express that. So the question that we have, my dear friend, is Judaism the only true religion? And if it isn't the only true religion, how do we decide which true religion we should follow?
Well, is there such thing as a true religion?
Well, is there a religion that has the largest percentage of truth in it?
Is truth measured by percentages?
Okay. Is there
I'm
truth
trying to figure out.
Is there truth in all religions?
Yes. Well, it depends. I mean, there could be, and there could. Yeah. Is there truth in all religions? There could be.
Okay. So let me rephrase it again. Is there a reason to talk to anyone who isn't Jewish?
Right. There is.
And if so, what is that reason other than cordiality?
Well, first of all, I think we can learn a lot from each other.
Aha. And what Why can we learn something from them?
Because there are things that our religious culture didn't know.
Like what?
Well, there's things from not just religion, science, for example. I mean, if you treat skin diseases the way Leviticus tells you to do it, you're not going to get better. A shot of penicillin is a hell of a lot more effective than a sacrificed goat, right? So I think that you can learn things. I believe Maimonides said that you take truth where you can find it. And if
Yeah.
there's truth in science, there's truth in science. I have found tremendous insight from other religious faiths, the language, the insight, I think, and it's made my faith stronger.
Okay. So then let me try a different approach.
That
You have
fair?
a very high wall
That
here.
that a fair answer? I'm trying to.
I don't think so. I
All
think
right, go
that's a
ahead.
high
Tell me what
wall
your
of
argument
defense.
is. Make your
Okay,
argument.
let's try it this way. If love your neighbor as yourself is the highest truth, and Hillel, by the way, said it was, what do we need the other stuff in Judaism for? Isn't it enough to just love your neighbor as yourself? Or in the Hindu and Buddhist world, to engage in ahimsa, non-violence, and try to nurture kindness, compassion, and all of the other virtues. Why not just say that's what everyone should do? And lighting candles, keeping kosher, hearing a shofar, all the stuff that we do that only Jews do, you can let that go. You can
So
let it.
let me ask you the other question, which is if every religious culture in the world teaches the same fundamental ethic, how come we don't do it?
Okay, that I like that. It's a good slipping of the question.
No, it's
Good
not. It's
slipping of the
exactly the.
punch.
No, I'll tell you why it's not slipping of the punch, because the answer to your question is that just teaching the dictum, the apodictic commandment, love the other as yourself, is not enough. You
Why?
because human beings don't respond that way. Because when you butt in front of me in the line at the bank, I forget that I'm commanded to love you as myself, and I want to whack you over the head with my checkbook. Okay? What keeps me from whacking you over the head with my checkbook is that I belong to a comprehensive religious culture that has shaped me as a human being and helps me see you as like myself and love you as myself. It's not simply enough just to tell you to do it. You've got to bring people into that way of looking at the universe. And that's what the rest of religious culture is about.
Okay. Since we seem to be in a little bit more contentious mode today,
No, come
I'm
on.
willing to
I
put on
love
the
you as
gloves.
myself.
Okay. How about the problem that the rest of the religious culture, other than love your neighbor as yourself, includes things like your daughter can't read from the Torah. Don't let a witch live. Um, homosexuality is an avera, an abomination.
Right.
How do you deal with the fact that other than universal ethical concepts, which everyone agrees are true, the other part of the culture, the stuff that only Jews have, can have very discriminatory elements in it. And not only is it permissible to let go of it, because we're really only made better as human beings by following the golden rule. The rest of it may help you follow the golden rule, but it's not necessary. But the real question is, some of the other stuff goes against the golden rule. When you don't let women read from the Torah or become rabbis, you're not treating them loving them as you love yourself.
Mhm.
Because part of loving another person as you love yourself is equality.
Right.
It means they are equal to you. And any discrimination which prevents you from seeing that equality is wrong. So how do you deal with the fact that let's face it, this is for us, a 4,000-year tradition. You can't imagine, nothing could be true now that was true 4,000 years ago. It's amazing we have the golden rule, but we have it because I think it was given by God, and it isn't a human document. And I know you believe that too. But the truth of the matter is, the reform movement in its early days, and even now still, has taken a very liberal view about getting rid of stuff that doesn't conform to the golden rule. How do you deal with that?
I think that I look at a religious culture as formative of certain kinds of human personality. And I love the idea that the golden rule is the essence of that personality, right? I read it a little differently than most people. I don't read kamocha, the third word, as modifying ve'ahavta. I read kamocha as modifying reacha. In other words, I think the translation of it is you will love the other who is just like you, who is intimately and ultimately connected to your being. That's how I read this thing. It's a statement of oneness. In my synagogue, there's two beautiful stained glass windows. One of them has the words of Shema, right? Adonai Echad, God is one, and the other one has Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you will love the others yourself. And the two of them face each other, and they're really, I've taught this lecture many times, they're ultimately the same truth. Because the idea of seeing the other as part of me, that our separation is only on a surface level, but deep down, you and I share a destiny. You and I share a world. You and I share so much, and your pain ultimately affects me. That's the basic, that's the truth at the heart of our Torah. That I think is the truth at the heart of Torah. And then everything else is there to support that truth and to teach us how to
But
live.
what if it doesn't
Wait, wait,
support?
wait, wait, wait. I'm going to answer your question. It's there to help us live that way. But the rest of the stuff, assimilated into it as the culture was developed, it assimilated into it all of the prejudices and all of the bad habits and a lot of personal junk that goes into the creation of a culture. And then we have a process over the 4,000 years of our history of refining that culture and getting rid of all of that dross and understanding that, wow, I didn't understand it like I understand it now. Look, and I think that's the question of moral progress. That's the question of moral growth, moral learning. When I understand that women have to be accepted as equal, not just accepted, respected, given the dignity of equality in the synagogue as well as in the greater society. And I have to change a lot of my own personal habits. I have to change a lot of my personal habits because I was trained as a 1960s male, and I have to learn how to see women in a very different way. I had to learn how to see people who are of other lifestyles, trans and LGBTQ and other lifestyles, and understand their inner struggle and feel their pain and accept them. We're growing. That's what this is all about. It's about moral growth. If you said that the tradition never changed, it's all given by God and it can never change, then you would have a very much strong point. But the fact that we're a dynamic tradition, changing and refining ourselves and growing morally, that I think is the great gift of Jewish faith, a growing
Okay,
moral tradition, right?
okay. The problem with that argument is that this system of eliminating the dross, the bad stuff
Mhm.
in our tradition, began in the 19th century
No,
of
it
a
began.
4,000-year-old tradition.
No, I disagree. It began at the very beginning of the tradition.
Well, oh, you mean
I
with the
can show
rose
you how it
wool?
began. No, even before that. In the Torah, God says to Moses, Adonai, Adonai, I am God, I am kind, and I am generous, and I keep my faith to the 1,000th generation. But if you piss me off, I will punish you to the third and fourth generation. It's in Genesis, it's in Exodus 34, right? And then what happens? The prophet Ezekiel comes along and says, no, everyone
Ish
gets
b'cheto
punished.
yamut. Right.
That's it. Each one is punished for his own sins. This process has been working its
A
way
fair point,
since
a
the
fair
first
point, and I
moment.
take that point.
Good.
The problem is, what I'm trying to get at here is
Go ahead.
that there is a part of Judaism, however, what percentage it is, Orthodox Judaism, which says no, this isn't a process of getting rid of the dross, because some of what you say is the dross is just cultural faddism, and you follow whatever the cultural fad is at the time. We
Yeah.
don't do that. So the fact of the matter is that getting rid of the dross, if it was actually rooted as deeply in Judaism as you say, would apply to all parts of Judaism, and it doesn't. And in fact, if you look at the actual success of those who believe Judaism can change from its original revelation, Reform and conservative and Reconstructionist Jews, and those who believe it doesn't basically change, the ones who believe it doesn't basically change are growing and we're shrinking. So let's look at this process with some honest eyes here. Getting rid of the dross carries with it some very big dangers, and that is throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. It's a process that has to be engaged in with tremendous care and tremendous sensitivity and a tremendous, but it also has to be engaged in, right? It also, it's a process. Look, if that process didn't exist, I wouldn't be in this world. I wouldn't be in this kind of thing. I wouldn't be part of this tradition. I can't belong to a
Me neither.
tradition.
Me
I won't
neither.
belong to a tradition that teaches retrograde ethical principles and then says God said them, right? 'Cause I
Correct.
don't believe in that God. I
But people ask me all the time, as I'm sure they ask you, why aren't you Orthodox? And I say, because of the treatment of women. If it had a way to get women equal rights, I think I could really accept the view about golf. That also needs to change. But basically, I would.
I can find you a tshuva on that one. The
Okay.
Rambam, very few people know that the
Was
Rambam was a championship golfer.
fair enough. But
Says it.
basically, you're right. I'm with you. The problem is that there's several problems. The first is, how do you decide what to jettison and what to keep?
Absolutely.
What
Great question.
we agree. And
Right.
the second problem, which I was trying to move toward, is what does this mean about our relationship with other religions? I've heard way too often, comments from Jews about Islam who know nothing about Judaism and less about Islam, that it's been a warlike religion forever, and it's been a hateful religion forever, and Muhammad did this and Muhammad did that, and all of these really, really terrible accusations about Islam, as if there was never a Solomon ibn Gabirol or a Maimonides or Jews in Muslim Spain who rose to the highest levels of accomplishment, or that Maimonides, who was the court physician to Saladin, was never in that world. There are Jews who just simply have a prejudiced view about Islam, and you know the lane I'm in, and the lane that I entered with Tom Hartman was, hey, we know enough about how we're different, and we don't know enough about how we're all the same. And that means the way we are all the same is that our basic ethical code is the same. Now, there are reasons why I light Shabbos candles, but they aren't, and you light Shabbos candles. The reason I light them with Betty is not because I think it's an ethical act. I don't think it makes me a better person to light Shabbos candles, because I know that out there's some slumlord in, Brooklyn or somewhere, who's an Orthodox Jew, who's lighting Shabbos candles, and it isn't affecting his moral perversions at all. But I light the candles because, and I think the best answer was yours, which is, there's a Jewish story, there's a narrative. And it isn't just about abstract ethical principles. I'm very mindful of that building we both know about, the ethical culture building in New York, the most beautiful building on the park. And there, who is there? What ethical culturists are there? You forget the son of
Felix Adler.
Iris Adler,
Right.
Felix, said Reform Judaism at Temple Emmanuel was too Jewish. So he starts this ethical culture thing. So I understand that a religion that considers itself just ethical, just the purveyor of ethical truths, cannot rise to a level where people can teach it, learn it, to teach it to their children, and learn it and preserve it. But I don't ever mistake, ever, acts of ritual fidelity to our tradition with an ethical act. That's where I stand firm. And that's where I think, I know, I've met Christians who are more ethically respectable than Jews I've known. And you have too. So the fact of the matter is, we have to take a stand on the question of, are there many paths up the mountain, or is there only our path? And the rest of these people are Mishigoyim. They're crazy people who don't have a chance at salvation, which is the Christian view from John 14. I think we have to commit ourselves to speak and to believe that there are other, that God gave the truth to every religion in measure, and there's no reason to pick a percentage of it. I will tell you, I've been trying to reconstitute the God Squad. I've been thought of it because Channel 7 asked me on to be on before Pesach, and they loved it. And I said, why don't you, look, Tommy's dead. You got to find someone else. So I went to someone, a distinguished major Christian prelate, I can't say his name, and he turned me down. So just the difficulty Jews have in taking non-Jews seriously, because when we say the word goyim, it's a very negative term, also is in Christianity. And that the major view on interfaith relations, which I've given my life to, is thank you, Gelman, thank you, Harbin, very nice. Now, that's enough. Stay with your own people, stay with your own tribe. What you're doing increases intermarriage and all sorts of stuff. I am focused on Kedoshim this year, as every year, on saying, let us find in other religions echoes of Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. And let us say, if you believe that, you are my brother, you are my sister, and we are climbing the same mountain to God, and the world needs to hear what we believe.
Amen.
Amen. Will the
Amen.
congregation please be seated?
I'll add one piece, and then I want to dispute one piece. There's a fact that motivates a great deal of my ethical thinking. And the fact is, it's a very small planet, and it's a crowded planet, and it's the only planet we have right now. And if we can't figure out how to live together on this planet, then our species is in very deep trouble. And it's come to that now because
Yes,
our
it has.
species now possesses the resources to destroy ourselves slowly or quickly, depending on how we decide to do it. And
Yeah.
therefore, the ethical, one of the great ethical questions of this moment of 21st century human consciousness is, does your culture contribute to a more harmonious, balanced life on this planet, or does it set us against each other? Because any culture that sets us against each other right now is fatal. It's absolutely fatal, right? And so I think that your point is beautifully expressed, but there's a poignancy, there's a punch to it now that we have
Yes.
to add to it
Yes.
because of this moment in our collective history. That's the first point. The other point is only this. I don't disagree with you, but I want to quibble on one small point. I actually do think that ritual observances can, doesn't always, but can contribute to ethical growth and ethical consciousness. Like, let's take the one that you mentioned. You're exactly right. There's some slumlord out there living a life way more observant of Jewish law than me. And he justifies it to himself. God knows how, but he does. But that's not, he may be my problem because he's a slumlord. But my problem is when I light Shabbos candles with my family, it creates a certain atmosphere in that house. It says something to my kids. It says something to my soul about who I am and what I do in the world and who matters to me in the world. And I do think that ethics come and ritual are attached to each other, sometimes in some subterranean ways and sometimes in some very blatant ways.
Look,
Kashrut,
I don't need
kosher,
to, I'm happy to concede that point
good,
because I like candles and you like candles. So
right.
I don't want to put too fine a edge on that. What I want to say is that to reinforce what you said, it can make you a better person.
Yes,
It doesn't
yes,
have to make you a better. And my point to drive this home again and again is when you observe ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, it 100% makes you a better person.
right,
Always makes you a better person.
right.
Not it can make you a better person. It does make you a better person. In fact, it is the only way to become a better person. So what we have in Judaism are two things whose differential is so great. One absolutely makes you better, and one could make you better depending on your view of
No, but
how.
again, you're dividing these things, and I don't divide them.
I know you don't,
The
but
only
I'm
way
trying
to
to tell
live,
you they are different.
the only way to live, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. First of all, is to be very reflective about the way you behave in the world, and very
Right.
reflective about your ethics. And sometimes your ethical impulse is not the right impulse. There are other ways to think about it. And you have to, it takes some sophistication. And that's what an ethical culture can teach us, is the sophistication that it takes to really examine,
Fair point.
how do I love the other as myself? Number two, in order to get a person to that place, you can't just do it by telling them to do it. You've got to create an environment that trains up an ethical sensibility, an ethical sensitivity. Also trains up, by the way, a certain sense of personal security, right? Guy cuts me off in traffic. This happens in LA all the time, right? My first impulse is to slam on the accelerator and send 3,000 pounds of Japanese steel hurtling through the air to show that son of a gun that he's not going to take my spot on the 101 freeway, right? Then I got to stop and say, like, what are you, a schmuck? Let him go. So he gets home exactly a tenth of a second before you do. And that's because I've been trained by a religious culture to stop and examine my behavior and stop and understand who he is and who he might be and think about a number of things. That set of responses is programmed into me by a lifetime of living this tradition. Yes, it doesn't have to. It always sometimes doesn't, right? I remember my wife was a counselor, a rabbi at Beit Tshuva, and she's talking to some very religious people who did some very terrible things in the world, and they somehow managed to separate them, right? But we've never taught that. We've taught our children and the children in my community to always see the ritual as contributing to an ethical sensibility. That's how it has to happen. That's the only argument I'm making. But I agree with you. The most important point is the point that you made, which is we have to learn how to see truth in each other's traditions and understand that there's a lot more that unites us than separates us. That's
Yeah,
very, very important.
yeah, I think it is. It's
That's
I'm not arguing against kashrut. I'm not arguing against Shmirat Shabbat. I'm not arguing against any of the rituals that are not universalizable in Judaism, meaning that they're only meant for Jews. What I am saying is that the focus of our education
Here you go.
is way, way overbalanced on the ritual side. What's the bracha for challah? What's the bracha for?
You're absolutely right.
And the training, which you eloquently say these things prepare you for ethical behavior, is embarrassingly absent.
Right.
For 15 years at my synagogue, the thing I did that I was most proud of was something called the virtue lectures.
Hmm.
And what it was every sixth grade kid and their parents would come for 6 lectures I would give on the ethical stuff, how Judaism is more than blessing bread. There was a thing on cheating. There was a thing on racism. There was a thing on sexual ethics, even. And it was all volunteer. You didn't have to come, but everyone came. And I was proud. And after I gave the lecture, we would divide up, some of them, we would divide up boys and girls, like the sex lecture. Sometimes we would divide up just in arbitrary groups with parents. Sometimes parents would stay with me. That was most common. And the kids would go with my staff and talk about the themes I brought up in the lecture separately. But the point was, we were teaching Jewish ethics. We were teaching Jewish ethics at my synagogue. And I was proud of that, really proud of that. And when I look at the curriculum that most schools have, it's deficient in so many ways. It's criminally deficient. One
Right.
is this way, in teaching moral behavior and saying some things are right, some things are wrong, and here's some of the things that are right, and here's some of the things that are wrong. And the second is, this is why we love Israel. This is the history of Israel. This is why you should love Israel. I mean, when we start out with Abraham and Sarah and Rachel and Rebecca and Leah, that's all good, but it's so far away from what is enough.
Right.
And it's so far away from what is needed.
Right. And
Amen.
the topics that are the most embarrassing topics are the ones that are most wanting. Let's talk about money and how we
Yeah,
use money. Let's talk about sex because
yes,
it's so ubiquitous in the culture. Let's talk about
yes,
bodies and how we dress and how we look at each other. Let's
right.
talk about these kinds of qualities of human dignity. Let's talk about who's included and who's not included. Let's talk about power and how it's used in a culture. These are topics which are deeply embarrassing, and that's exactly the point because they're so tied to what's real ethically, and we're afraid to hurt anybody's feelings by talking about these things or offending because we're talking about these are exactly the places where Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha lives, where it really lives. Well, Mark, thank you. Kedoshim Tihiyu. This week, let's all try and be another degree holier, and let's pray for peace this week. Let's hope for something that brings us some hope. It's Yom HaAtzmaut this week, Yom HaZikaron, remembering those who fell in defense of the state of Israel. Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day. It's going to be very hard to celebrate in Israel, but we will all remember the great gift of hope that the state of Israel has brought us in our generation, and let's give thanks for that. Take care. Have a good Shabbat.
Shabbat shalom.